Talking Futures, Mormedi.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. Hello and welcome to the first installment of Talking Futures in English. Very happy to have you here. So, my name is Marwan Al-Mahjoub. I'm the Director of Business Strategy here at Mormedi. And in this series of mini webcasts, we take a look at some of the consumer, industry, and business trends that are transforming customer experience. Here at Mormedi, we're constantly looking at trends, and we often use our tool, the trend cards, to think about how the future may unfold. And for our series of Talking Futures, we invite very prestigious guests to help us imagine what the future might look like. And today we are delighted to have Adipat Virdi here with us. Adipat, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
So Adipat is an immersive strategist and was previously the creative product lead for VR Global at Facebook and is now consulting with us on immersive experiences. Adi, we're going to be looking at a selection of 4 different trends from our trend card set. So here they come. Thank you, Valeria. So the ones that we have here, we have on the one hand, social enterprises, we have space typologies, we have immersive experiences, and we have ambient intelligence. Now, all are very interesting subjects, which we could talk about at length on all of them, but I'd like to ask you to just select one of them so we can discuss it today.
I think my gut says I want to talk about space typologies.
Space typologies, okay. So the format is simple. I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and we'd just love to hear your thoughts about this trend. So You said space typologies. First and simple question, why did you choose this trend?
Because it's in my DNA in terms of my career. I started life as an architect, and it was one of these things I actually didn't think I wanted to be an architect, didn't enjoy it, but it wasn't about the building. What I learned as I went through that career was it's not about the physical space, it's actually about the space that the physicality of the building leaves behind. And there's a very awesome book called Space is the Machine by a guy called Bill Hillier. And that's how I think about it. It's like, all the stuff that happens in the space, the non-tangible bit of a building. And it gives us so much insight into things. So for me, that's really important. And it's like a living, breathing organism that you can curate for whatever you want. So that's exciting.
So where would you say we are with this trend today?
So it's interesting. So my work in immersive and looking at VR and where that's going, the notion of how we actually create space, how we interact in it, how we use it as a method of design is very much where I think we're going. So I remember we worked on a project for the government in the UK, and it was very much about, well, how do we create a more effective organization? So there was all sorts of thinking around business process, behavioral dynamics. But essentially it came down to, well, where are all of those things taking place? How is the space configured? And I think that's where the trend is now. This notion that, the relationship of usable space to all other usable space within an environment is actually giving us insight into things like predicting choices that people might make or predicting the way we interact. And that's mind-blowing that, if we can actually sort of conceptualize, what's going on, we can make inferences to create more efficiency, new opportunities, and actually use it as a way of creating innovation. And if you transpose that to the virtual world, with all the chat around metaverse at the moment, it's like, how do I actually build in the virtual space? And there's no limits. So I think that's where this trend is going, this sort of analytical look at, the unit of space and what that can allow us to do, in terms of understanding lots of different things about the way we live our lives.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you just touched upon it there, but how do you think that this is going to impact the world in the next 5 years? How are things going to change?
So I think, but that for me is a really interesting question. So the first thing is, if we can quantify, the way in which we design space, right, which I've talked about. So, and it's worth mentioning an example. So the Jubilee Line extension in the UK, it's part of the London Underground. One of the questions that was asked, so there was a project there, and the question was, how can people feel how can we understand the way people feel as they walk through this space? And that's a great question. It's like, can I map feeling? How does a space make me actually, react? What emotions does it sort of derive? And I think that's amazing. If we can quantitatively get a handle on this sort of qualitative information, that's a great way of, really mobilizing, things like, how we design effectiveness and so forth. But in terms of the future, especially going back to the metaverse, everyone's talking about this word right now, is what will that mean in terms of, really designing spaces that are impactful, have not just commercial impact, but social impact? How can I sort of design an environment where I can build experiences where we can actually look to make, answer questions that are at the forefront of people's minds, right? How can we create intelligence in the spatial environment to give us feedback about being more effective or a better version of ourselves, ultimately, if we're thinking philosophically? So I think that's where it's kind of going.
Okay, brilliant. So I don't know if we're allowed or we have time to take questions from the audience, or otherwise I've got a ton of questions about this. So I mean, the question that comes to my mind is, we've got the real spaces, we've got virtual spaces. What's going to happen to that interaction between the two in the future?
That's a good question. And, we're all at the beginning of this journey. So I mean, I don't know is the honest answer to that question, because it's also new and things are changing. But in terms of some insights, I think that sort of bleeding edge between the two is an interesting space, an interesting space, in the sense that we can really sort of, start to think about who are we in a digital environment? What does it look like to exist or coexist with our digital selves and our real selves? What is that relationship? Is that a meaningful relationship? Does that add value to the way we live our lives? And I think that's a really interesting question that we need to ask as we move forward in this space of immersion. Because it's like, what is the value of creating things like choice or personalization? Is that something that's going to add value to, the community we belong to, the way in which we relate to people, the emotions we can feel, to making ourselves think more about things? So I think that's a really important outcome of where those two spaces meet.
Mm-hmm. And I'd just like to touch on the last point that you made about that marriage between quantitative and qualitative. I mean, these are the types of challenges which we love here at Mormedi, is thinking about both aspects. And really, when we're talking about spaces nowadays, both virtual and real, we have the ability to quantify things in a way which we never had before, right? When you can use machine learning and AI and things like that. So what do you think, how will that affect, the fact that we can now kind of quantify things, we can look at emotions, how will that change the way that spaces are designed into the future?
Okay, so again, that's such a good question, because, this notion of qualitative, measurement, it's a very important part of the fact that we are emerging into the experience economy, right? And I've said this before, that we are moving to a model where, from an economic point of view, it's no longer about transaction. It's about interaction, right? And that sort of experience economy lends itself to questions about, well, how do we connect, right? So how do I measure if I've connected to an experience or connected to another human being? And, we just need to think more about that, because I think that's going to allow us to really dig deep into what it means to coexist, in a virtual sense, and how that's going to impact on, solving real world problems. So I think we need to embrace it. I don't think it's a fad, but I really think that qualitative element is key to understanding and embedding in the way we deliver that, more experiences that are meaningful.
Brilliant. Fascinating stuff. Thank you very much, Adi. I think that's our time. It's been great. I wish we could go on for longer, and I'm sure that we will over drinks. Thank you for everybody watching here and watching us online, whether you be live or watching us on your favorite platform in the future. And please join us for the next one. Thanks very much.